This is my husband and my property.
Yep.
And it's been in my husband's family since the 1960s.
Okay.
Which is quite a few years now, I suppose, when you think about it. Unfortunately, we had the misfortune of being approached by a coal seam gas company 2 years ago,
Right.
wanting to come and do some fairly invasive exploration work on one of our farms.
So when you say invasive exploration work, what did that actually involve? What did they want to do specifically?
Yeah, well, they wanted to do what they call a pilot project. 18 months prior to them coming and wanting to do the project, they had been out and drilled some single exploration holes in the railway reserve.
Yep.
When they approached us, they wanted to do this pilot, which involved 6 wells, and with that an associated 40 megalitre holding pond to put the salty produced water in. And the combined footprint of the holding pond and the well infrastructure is 97 acres.
Wow.
So a fairly massive imposition on anyone's farm, I suppose, but particularly on a cropping farm like this. And you know, the company representative didn't say at the time. He said, well, the pilot runs for 7 months, but in actuality, the infrastructure remains there for the entire life of the project because, you know, the gas is here. They're not going to dismantle the thing and then come back and put in a petroleum gas field. So it would have stayed there for, who knows, 20 plus years.
Okay. So, I mean, obviously there's a regulatory framework which enables that sort of thing to be proposed to you. I would imagine that that yourself and other people in the area would have educated yourselves, you know, very much. It's obviously in your interest to do so about that regulatory framework. Do you have any concerns about the sort of decision making that's gone on from DERM and the Queensland government?
Well, with regards to that particular project, the pilot project, the company requires what's called a level 1 environmental authority in order to do that sort of project. And the company didn't have a level 1 environmental authority when they approached us. They had a level 2 environmental authority, which gave them permission to do the single exploration wells. But the level 1 environmental authority requires a new environmental authority, more rigorous conditioning, basically because of the holding pond.
Yep.
The company didn't have that, so that was concerning to me. And when I actually rang DERM and said, look, you know, they want to do a pilot, and the DERM guy said, well, they don't have a level 1 environmental authority. He was concerned. So,
okay.
But with regards to DERM, and in regards to the issue of the pilot, I contacted the Petroleum and Gas Unit in DERM after we'd been approached. Actually, after they issued them with the environmental authority that they needed, and asked them, have you actually come out here and ground truth for yourselves to see what it is that you're granting these environmental authorities over? And no, they hadn't. So the delegates of administering authority, so the people in DERM, in the Petroleum and Gas Unit, who actually write these environmental authorities to grant coal seam gas companies to conduct activities on someone else's property, don't actually have any idea of the type of country that they're granting these permissions over. So that's alarming for starters. And I think basically there's this complete breakdown in proper process with regards to baseline environmental assessments and doing things in the right order with regards to the setup of this industry and the conditioning process.
Okay.
There was an interdepartmental report that came out in 2006 in the Departments of Mines and Energy, and the report recommended to the state government that prior to issuing tenure to coal seam gas companies, that baseline environmental assessments ought to be done to determine where it is and where it isn't appropriate for this industry to go.
All right.
Well, that advice was ignored, and the environmental authorities, the tenures, the right to prospect in certain areas, they were issued regardless. So now we have the situation, of course, in our area here, where we're utilising all of our area for cropping. We don't have any sort of areas down the back where we could put a well.
Yep.
And we have these particular environmental sensitivities surrounding the groundwater and the soils. And the government has completely ignored their own advice, hasn't picked up on these sensitivities, and they're running full steam ahead in granting a coal seam gas company permission to conduct their activities here.
Okay, so on this particular property, what stage is that whole process at now?
This whole area is still under an authority to prospect with the level 1 environmental authority attached, which gives the company permission to explore and to do the pilots. They are in a transition phase at the moment where they have released their environmental impact statement to the government for their entire Surat Basin project, which extends from Wondowan to Gundawindi and covers this area.
Yep.
That's currently sitting with government now, and they're checking to make sure it complies with the terms of reference. And we're expecting that in the next few weeks, that document will be made available to the public for a submissions process. Once it goes through submissions, then the company has to respond to the submissions and re-release a document, upon which stage I think that the conditioning occurs and the government sets conditions for the entire project.
Right.
At no time during that entire process have we ever had any comfort or felt convinced at all that the government would see sense, I suppose, and exclude any of this area from resource development. Particularly so that when they granted the environmental authority for Arrows Dalby expansion project, which covers an area slightly west of here,
Yep.
they actually granted permission for the company to drill 300 wells as part of this Surat Basin project, which is a project that at the time technically did not exist.
Okay.
And even in the language that the government's been using over the last couple of months, they've been talking about this project as if it's already been approved.
Okay. So essentially what you're saying is that you don't have a lot of confidence in proper process, and in particular you don't think that that the environmental assessment, which then should be followed by action one way or another as to whether they can have a tenement and exploit it, is proceeding in the way that it ought. That's a reasonable summary?
Oh, I would agree
Yeah.
with that. And to sort of embellish that a bit, this 2006 Department of Mines and Energy document also said that the company were that the state government were abrogating the precautionary principle, and that to assume that only the development of a coal seam gas industry was in the public interest without giving regard to other things that may also be in the public interest that are conflicting,
Yep.
is incorrect and not the right way to be going about things. So I think, I think it's clear right from at the outset that the government has decided, yes, we want a coal seam gas industry. Basically, this industry can go wherever it wants to go.
Yep.
And be damned.
Okay. So obviously we've got a state election in a few weeks' time. I mean, do you think that there's any likelihood that whatever the outcome of that election is, anything will change in the political sphere and bureaucratic sphere? Or?
Well, unfortunately, I really do think that this is a two-horse race.
Yep.
At the end of the day, we're either going to have a Labor or an LNP government, and it's my understanding that the position of both of those major parties on the issue of a coal seam gas industry in this part of the world is the same, and is that they both embrace it.
Okay. So where does that leave landholders and other concerned members in the community here in terms of going forward?
Well, it leaves us in a very sad place,
Yep.
and it unfortunately leaves us in the position where, as law-abiding citizens, we are faced with the prospect of having to break the law to protect those environmental values that our government has failed to. I've got young children who may want to farm. I don't know. Farmers have this philosophy where they like to leave a positive legacy for the next generation.
Yep.
I'd like my children to have the same opportunities that we've had, but I don't know if the government's going to allow that to happen, not by my own choice. So we really are in the position where we have to decide for ourselves, do we accept the inevitable, or do we accept what happens and allow this industry to happen in this area? Or do we say no? Do we take a stand and say it is not appropriate, it's not in the interest of the people of Queensland, you can't come? And that's a decision for the individual.